Kids these days are different in many ways. If we can understand more about why kids are showing up differently instead of just judging them for showing up differently, we can create greater ease in the coach-athlete relationship and an up-leveled sport experience for everybody.
Coaches, welcome to the Better Coaching Podcast, powered by RYG Athletics, a proud provider of Nike sports camps. The mission of this podcast is simple. We want to help coaches get better. We do it by connecting coaches with ideas and strategies they can implement to grow as a coach and a leader to ultimately better serve their players and teams. I'm excited to welcome Betsy Butterick back to the podcast. Betsy is a seasoned pro who utilizes the transformative power of communication to help build high-performing teams. As a former coach, Betsy understands that chemistry is more than just a buzzword. It's the result of genuine connection, and at its core lies effective communication. In her role as the coach's coach, Betsy meets individuals where they are and supports their growth and evolution. As a communication specialist, she works collaboratively to enhance communication and effectiveness to drive positive change at every level. Betsy has the exceptional ability to connect with audiences as a facilitator and an educator. She offers a professional, playful, and people-centric approach to learning and development. A lifelong athlete, Betsy grew up playing all sports and was a competitive basketball player at the collegiate level. In this episode, we're going to be diving into her new book, Kids These Days: Effective Strategies for Coaching Gen Z and Beyond. And before we dive into the show, if you're interested in learning more about how we serve and work with coaches, head to the show details for links to the free podcast notes, our free online community of hundreds of coaches, and information on becoming one of our Nike sports camp directors. Now to the show. Enjoy. Coaches, really excited to welcome Betsy Butterick back to the podcast. Betsy's been on before, is a coach's coach, background in coaching, and recently released her new book, Kids These Days, and she dives into effective strategies for leading Gen Z. So, Betsy, really excited to welcome you back, and I'd love it if you just started off and told the audience a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. First of all, great to see you again. I always love sharing space and conversation with you. Why did I write the book? So, a lot of my work is driven largely by what's coming up for coaches and athletes, mostly at the college level, but also, professional sports in high school. Gosh, I think it was back in 2017. I just finished a presentation at San Diego State University, and one of the senior administrators asked afterwards, she said, Betsy, do you have anything on coaching kids these days? Because I feel like they're a little bit different. And I said, no, not yet, but that sounds like a really fascinating topic to research. And the more I started to research it, the more I started to develop, how can we proactively, collaboratively work with kids these days? Why are they showing up differently? What's this about? What are the challenges? The more expansive that field became. And over the last, I'll say 5 to 7 years, the workshops that I have on effectively coaching Gen Z or relating to today's student athlete have far and away been the most requested. So I quickly found out this is not a unique challenge. And why I wrote the book was, one, I wanted to be able to give people who would benefit from it information without me having to be in the room with them. Two, it's a scary time to be a coach. I mean, when we look across the landscape of sports, like, yes, especially at the college level, between the transfer portal and NIL, like kids have more choices these days than they have before. And I know coaches have a lot to say about those choices and the freedom and flexibility without penalty, consequence, etc., loyalty, work ethic, instant gratification, all those things. And I have seen so many people either opt out of the coaching profession because they feel the demand is too big. They feel that the job has changed away from what they, got into it for coaching and developing young people. Um, and it just, I needed to be able to provide a resource to the coaching community that helps give them choices to optimize what coaching is now, so that if they decide to stay in the sport, they have an elevated way to go about doing this job that we call coaching. So I did it somewhat for protective reasons, somewhat for proactive reasons, and all with the intention of we are where we are. Kids these days are different in many ways. If we can understand more about why kids are showing up differently instead of just judging them for showing up differently, we can create greater ease in the coach-athlete relationship and an up-leveled sport experience for everybody.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm guessing you've read it, but I'm still in the middle of it. I'm reading The Anxious Generation by
Yeah,
Jonathan Haidt. To your point, yeah, kids are different, and the more we can accept that, try to understand them, connect with them, serve them, right? Instead of blame them or
criticize
put up
them,
these
judge
very
them.
criticize,
Yeah,
judge. It's like, how are we going to have strong relationships with them if that's the stance we take towards them? And I think you would probably know this. Most coaches, when you ask them, like, why did you get into coaching? Why do you coach? It's because they wanted to impact people. They wanted the
yes.
relationships. They were impacted in sport. They were impacted by coaches. It's like, hey, if we want to do that, then criticizing, judging, um, this generation is probably way less effective in getting to our goal and our why than trying to understand them and and lead them well. I think is
Yeah.
at the heart of it. So I'd love if you talked a little bit about something you talk in the book, like the why barrier. So many coaches I think struggle with Gen Z and their signature question of why. Like, these kids want to know the why behind the what. Will you talk about that and how coaches can and should navigate it?
Yeah, it's a best practice for coaches of all sports these days to lead with the why. So if you're a coach listening and you're not currently doing that, that would be one place to start to make some positive change. I had a member of Gen Z, and this is becoming a more frequent occurrence when I speak with audiences about relating to today's student athletes and effectively coaching Gen Z and beyond. So Gen Alpha, born roughly around 2012, experiences a lot of the same hallmarks that we're seeing with Gen Z. Big differentiation between Gen Z and older generations is they've never known life without the internet. And you mentioned the anxious generation, and they talk a lot in that book about a screen-based childhood or phone-based childhood versus a play-based childhood. And even if we just look through the lens of that difference, having access to technology, like when I was growing up and I was born in 1983, so I'm an elder millennial. Like if I wanted to know something, I had to go to the library and use a tiny golf pencil in the Dewey Decimal System to look up the location of a book or ask someone older and wiser than me. Kids these days have been able to Google any question that's on their mind at any time. And I often ask coaches, I'll say, raise your hand if you've had a student athlete ask you a question that in some way felt like a challenge to your knowledge or authority. And so many hands go up, and there's like audible scoffs. People are like, yeah, they're so disrespectful. It's like, okay, I understand the felt disrespect, and I want to offer that they're simply executing a very well practiced skill. They're using you like Google. Google never says like, that's an inappropriate time to ask that question, Luke, or I didn't appreciate your tone. Like they just get to get information instantly. So when they ask why, or they challenge in some way, or if they're listening, let's say we're telling them what we're about to do in practice, they're hearing you. But what they're also thinking of is like, well, why does this matter? Or how will this provide value to me specifically? And it sounds very egotistical and self focused, but it's a product of their environment. They have had access to information from a very young age. So when coaches fail to lead with the why and they start with the what instead, they're missing an opportunity to create a higher level of listening and engagement than if they started with the why. Here's why what we're about to do matters, the value you can expect to get from engaging this way, and here's what we're going to do to facilitate our ability to reach that outcome.
Yeah, that's really good. It's hard though because what you said there is real. The almost recoil that can happen inside of us as coaches
Dare
is
you? Yeah.
yeah how, yeah the felt disrespect, and then it's easy for coaches to become emotional or then to assume the worst of the athlete or player instead of realizing, oh no, like, it's this is just normal for them, or this is how they've grown up, this is the skills they've learned, and that that's a much more powerful mindset to bring to the conversation. I think it's also a mindset that allows us to recognize that, like, at our heart we should be teachers even of those social dynamics, because like you said, the reality is like they're practicing this learned skill, and maybe some of what they haven't learned enough are some of those social skills of when and how to bring up those questions to leaders, people in
100%.
authority. And so it's a chance probably later on individuals say like, hey, I don't think you were trying to disrespect me. Uh, but when you bring something up like that or say that, leaders, people in authority can often feel disrespected, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
to use that as a chance to teach and grow them beyond just your sport, but that takes some emotional control from the coach and just self awareness too, and yeah, commitment to
Yeah.
help them grow.
Well, and you talk about skills, right? And it's like they have this skill, like this practice skill of Googling, of indexing for information. And what I often offer to coaches is anytime you find yourself frustrated with a deficit that you see, a judgment that you have about kids these days not knowing how to do X, what I want to offer is that it's not impossible, it's simply unpracticed because of how they were raised with technology, kids these days haven't had to practice some of the, especially social skills that were more innate for previous generations. Like we didn't grow up talking to people face to face in the same way that kids these days interfaced with a computer. So it's a different context. And when we start to understand the context, then we have a lot more patience or capacity for, okay, this is a teachable moment. I'm going to teach you how to ask a question in a respectful way so that should you encounter someone, which you inevitably will, who doesn't know you as well as I, as your coach, know you, that you can be received as intended instead of rejected or judged for being a certain way, even though that wasn't your intention.
Yeah, that's so good. I also would love to hear more just around your thoughts or what you're seeing or how you're working with coaches to, yeah, like what do coaches do with technology? Like phones, right?
Yeah.
Like, and especially as we think about, we want to try to teach them some of those social skills, life skills that they might be lacking because of the way that they've grown up in a world where there's a phone in their hands or they're on the, you know what I mean? Like the world is different from a technology
Yes.
standpoint. And so I'm just really curious that I think that's a struggle for coaches. Like, how do I get my kids to talk to each other? What do I do
Right.
with technology? I'm just really curious what your thoughts are, what you're seeing coaches are doing that are effective in creating environments where there's real connection happening, face to face,
Yeah.
embodied connection, and it's not being hijacked by technology.
Yeah. I'd say the first starting point is like identifying from kind of a level of self-reflection, self-awareness, like what are my thoughts and feelings on technology, especially the technology that I see my athletes using, like, oh, they're always on their phones or they're texting each other even when they're in the same room. Create an awareness around that first so that you understand where potential barriers might be for how you work with your athletes with technology. And I mean, any parent knows like if you tell a kid not to do something, they're probably going to do more of it or you're going to experience greater resistance. So technology is here. People, not just kids, people are interfacing with their phones. And remember when that app came out for the iPhone that tracks how long you're spending on certain apps? And I was like, oh my gosh, like I am on my phone, 5 hours a day. And yes, I use it for work, but also I am using it in spaces that didn't exist when I was growing up. And what else would I have done with that time? Well, I probably would have been connecting with people. So simply telling kids you can't do this or don't do this, very unlikely to move the needle in providing opportunities for them to not just experience, but start to value having interpersonal communication, like really connecting with people in real time. We are seeing a trend a little bit of, um, and I know we mentioned JP before and at the host of the Coaching Culture podcast. JP lives in Ireland, and within the community that he lives, they've had a shared agreement that, kids won't have social media accounts until they're 16. And this is something that is catching on. We're seeing people opt to get landlines in their house. And so kids can call each other, but only call each other on the house phone. And even that small act is providing an opportunity for them to start to learn to listen better. Like all we have is the sound of someone's voice when we're talking on the phone. We're not FaceTiming, so we can't see, facial expressions or body language. We're not texting, so we're not losing the nuance of tonality. And it's providing opportunities to practice. So, inviting athletes to experience the joy, the benefit, the enjoyment of connecting with people in shared space. And we get to do that in our training environments all the time. like by and large. And I know we've got kids that, at water break, they'll run over and they'll check their phone that's in their bag. Okay, so you create whatever rules you want in your training environment for how technology is used, when and how it's used. Sometimes, depending on the age of the kid that you're coaching, having dedicated spaces. So, okay, we're going to have a water break, or this is a phone break. Like if you need to check in with your parents or if you need to check in on social media, because a lot of the kids that we're coaching these days, especially at the college level, when they have NIL deals and they're responsible for creating so many posts for certain purposes throughout the week, like giving them dedicated time and space where this is a technology space, this is a technology free space. And the why, the purpose of each. So whether it's integrating technology breaks so that they get to do the thing that they want to do and that they're used to doing when they're not in practice. And I know this is going to sound really weird to coaches. Like, why am I building a technology break into my practice? Well, if technology is a big distraction for your athletes, then what you're really doing is removing a barrier so that they have that break and now they're able to fully focus or more fully focus on what you're trying to teach them in the training session. Now, let's say your practice environment is fully technology free. I often hear coaches talk about wearables. Well, what do I do with the wearables? It's like, okay, if they've got a wearable, there could be a lot of value for them in a sport specific way to tracking some of the metrics or data that they're getting from wearing that while they're training, especially if you don't have other, key performance indicators, if they're not wearing heart rate monitors, et cetera. So working with technology. Okay, you can have your wearable because I understand it's important for you to track certain data related to your performance, your output, and if you're going to wear it, you need to put it in do not disturb for the duration of training, right? Or, okay, we're going to have a moment you can check your watch because they get all sorts of stuff on there, but we can create settings to work within their need to have technology available, accessible at all times, but also in a way that works for us as coaches. So if I had to summarize, I'd say technology is here, finding ways to work within what they're used to, but also within our expectations, to be very clear about like setting those expectations and holding those boundaries, articulating the why and value of being invited into that space, but then also starting to give them real lived experience of what it's like to be in a tech-free zone. And I hear from coaches and parents, like when we have a team meal and we say, okay, everyone's going to put their phone in this basket, or we're going to pile up the phones here. Like a lot of kids these days are like, oh, thank goodness. Because when
Hmm.
I don't have access to it because I have to, because my coach took it away, now I actually have the freedom to relax because I don't feel like I have to be on and checking in all the time. Or if I miss something that, I'm going to be late to the conversation. Like they actually enjoy that space. And I think a lot of young people are seeking more of that. It's hard to choose when they feel the peer pressure to constantly stay connected.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, it's really good. It is cool to see when you create some of those tech-free spaces, a team meal or meeting or whatever it is. It, I think initially it can feel awkward and clunky for
Yeah.
the coaches and the players, and then it seems like inevitably like they do start talking to each other.
Yeah.
Like you put
Yeah.
them in.
It's like if you build it, they will come. Like if
Yeah,
you create a foam free space, like,
yeah,
and it's okay to say this will be hard. This
yeah,
will be different. Like we are going to have our phones on the ride to the facility or wherever we're going for an away game. And then when we're 20 minutes out, we're going to pass them forward and put them away so that we can just focus on our team. Like you can create whatever works well for you and your athletes, but inviting them into a space that's different, acknowledging, setting the expectation that this will feel uncomfortable or this is something you're not used to doing. And so it's going to feel difficult at first. The more we practice, the easier it's going to become. And here's why we're asking you to do these things. Like all of that is absolutely a conversation we can have.
yeah. I think the other piece and connected to that why there is I think it's probably important for coaches to educate themselves and then be willing to share some with their players and teams. Just like, hey, this is what research is showing. Like, these are the impacts of phones and technology, and they know it. A lot of them do, especially as they're older. Like, this is the impact technology is having on your sleep. This is the impact
Yeah.
technology is having on relationships. This is what social media is doing to anxiety levels. Like having some of those conversations with your teams and your players. I think one, again, a lot of them know it, but two, I think can be kind of enlightening and give them a little more clarity. Again, back to this whole conversation of the why of like, hey, this is why, as your coach, we're making these choices about technology,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because this is what we know about it, and we want
Yeah.
what's best for you.
And the avoiding, and this is the urge, like the urges we want to control, right? We want to control the environment. We want to control the usage. Instead of control, opting into educate, like educate them about the potential downfalls of high social media use, educate them about how their sleep might be impacted if they're on their phone right before, with the blue light exposure. Like give them the information, feed into that. They're already data driven. So give them the data and then invite them to make a choice that supports what they say is most important to them. Like if they want to be a high performer, okay, that means you're going to need X amount of sleep. That means you're going to need, this mental space to focus on your training. So how are you going to give yourself that within what your current usage is or what you want to be true in order to optimize how you perform in the space? But give them the information and then invite them to make a choice because we can't make them do things. But when we give them information and we create an invitation that's so desirable that they want to accept, that's far better than simply telling them you can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's probably even space there for coaches to bring them into the uh, the standards around technology or the expectations around technology on your team. Like share the information, do some education, have a discussion, and get some feedback from them. Hey, what do you guys think the boundaries around
Yeah.
technology should be here? Like
Yeah,
get some of that feedback from them um, and then maybe even arrive at that together. You may have to guide
for
it a little
sure.
bit or say, like, hey, as your coach, this is one area where like I'm not okay with them being at team meals at all. Right. But let's talk about buses, transport. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
bring them
Yes.
into that conversation because we're all more apt to follow through on things that we feel like we have a say in or ownership of.
Hmm.
And I know that's another thing you hit on in the book, just around that co-creation and
Yes.
standards. Like that's with this generation of kids, I think it's so powerful.
Yeah. Well, the reality, again, let's go to technology. Because of technology, they've been able to customize so many elements of their life from an early age. So that same expectation, though often unspoken, comes into their sport experience. And that's often because it's an unspoken expectation where frustration, disappointment, fractured relationships end up happening, especially between coaches and athletes, which unfair to both parties. Coaches never knew they had these expectations. Athletes never stated them, and yet we see the deterioration. So that element of co-creation, and there are so many ways to co-create. And it does not mean that a coach has to sacrifice their authority, their authenticity, their integrity. It doesn't mean that they have to lower their standards. What's first required is that a coach gets very clear about what are my negotiables and non-negotiables. Like what will I retain sole authority over, decision-making ability about? And what can I invite the athletes to co-create with me in some form? And sometimes I think often two things happen. One, coaches hear co-creation and they're like, well, why would I give the athletes a say in everything that we do when I'm in charge of running the program? Yes, please don't give them a say in everything. And how much of a say you give them is always up to you. So what I see happen often, Luke, is I'll have a coach, let's say, that does a drill for the first time in practice. And then, because they want to know, they ask for athlete feedback. They say, hey, I know that was a new drill. What was that like for you? And the feedback that they get is that was really frustrating. Like, I didn't like that. The unspoken expectation is because the coach has asked and because the players have been explicit in telling them, yeah, that wasn't good. That was hard. We didn't like that. The unspoken expectation is because coach knows how we feel, we won't do that drill again. Whereas for the coach, the intention was, I just want to know how that was. We're absolutely going to keep doing that drill because it's essential for skill development in this area. But because they didn't state clearly what they were going to do with that feedback, now we have a barrier. So if a coach does a drill for the first time, they might say to the athletes, hey, I realize that was probably frustrating, and this is a drill that we're going to continue to do. However, I am interested in what that was like for you. This is the first time we did it. Tell me what your experience was like. And then they tell them and say, okay, I want to let you know we are still going to do that. And I appreciate you letting me know what this first experience was like for you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's really good. Will you talk about other ways or effective ways where you've seen coaches co-create with their
Yeah.
teams? And like you said, big or small, I think there's kind of the large umbrella of co-creating standards or team identities with your players, which I think is really powerful and important. But like you said, I think there's more ways and areas that we can share some ownership with them.
Absolutely. And I said before, there's no limit on the number of ways that we can co-create. So as a coach, once you've identified, okay, what areas do I want to retain kind of sole decision-making authority over and what's open for co-creation, big and small things. So the bigger things would be cultural elements. And I do think that there's immense value in co-creating, what is the culture of our program? What do we value? What's important to this team this year? What kind of goals are we in pursuit of? The way I see this go is for kids these days, and I'll say especially at the college level, but this can apply to all levels. Historically, when someone entered a team or a program, it was a best practice for them to be onboarded into the current culture or the existing culture. What we're seeing is coaches get a lot more benefit out of co-creating the culture or the cultural norms with each team each year. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to vary greatly from year to year, but there is a lot of return on investment for inviting people to optimize or create with you how they see themselves working within established norms or values. So even if it's like a value of respect, and most programs, most sports, they would say, yeah, respect's really important. Okay, even though respect is a continual value of our culture, each year we're going to have a conversation about what does respect look like, not look like, sound like, not sound like, feel like, not feel like. How will we know if disrespect is present or if respect is present? And what will we do? If somebody feels disrespected, what is the expectation for either person or party about what to do next if and when that happens? So having the same conversation in different teams because the people have changed allows us to optimize and create that shared understanding. Simple things like, okay, every team I know has some way that they warm up or prepare for training or competition. So if you've got a menu of like 7 warm-up drills you would arguably do on any one day of training, maybe you as a coach or coaching staff pick one and allow the team to pick another. Most of the time, coaches are less attached to how a team warms up and more that they are appropriately warmed up to train and compete. So maybe that's an area that you can give a little bit. Even if we're looking at like high school or college, okay, we're going to have freshmen pick one drill for Monday, sophomores Tuesday, juniors Wednesday, seniors Thursday, and then Friday we're going to do a coach's choice and a new drill that we've never done before. So that's one example. Another very simple one would be attire. Like if you have, let's say, a couple different shirts that you would wear for training, maybe you've got like black, white, and gray. Okay, you just want everybody in the same gear. That's your expectation as a coach, but they get to pick which days they wear which colors. So it's small things like that. If you travel on the road with your team, everybody has to eat. Maybe you create a food committee within your team. People have an interest in food or self-described foodies. You as a coach can give them, let's say, 3 choices, any of which you're happy to take the team to for a meal. And then the food committee takes it back to the team and they decide which one of the 3 they're going to choose. Or they can come up with options that fit within a certain budget restraint that you give them. And they come up with options, and you, as the coach, make the final decision. Like these are small ways. And the magic of co creation is in the invitation. I'm inviting you to weigh in or participate within a very structured way that also works for me as a coach, how we have this shared experience together.
Yeah. Gen Z loves being given responsibility and real ownership. I think that's maybe sometimes what we can miss when we're
Yeah,
engaging with kids. They can feel so different and feel disconnected, but it's crazy to watch them light up when they're given real ownership and responsibility. Like a lot of the camp staff that we have at our sports camps, a lot of them are Gen Z, right? They're college
sure.
athletes or they
Yeah.
recently graduated from high school. But I'm just always like the level that they perform at in this role. It's like, man, they crush it,
Yeah.
like, and we give them some pretty high expectations and standards and hey, this is what we're expecting from you as a staff member or a coach at this camp. And then we find ways to give them meaningful responsibility on top of that throughout the week. And I'm like, man, they're like they're great. Like they can and do rise to the occasion. I think that's really worth highlighting out of what you said. Like where are ways where you can give meaningful responsibility and choice to them because I think we all thrive in that just as people, right? We want to feel
Yep.
like
We want
we
autonomy. We
yeah,
want ownership. Yes.
yeah, yeah, it's so powerful. Yeah, it's really good. No, another idea you hit on the book is the power of affirmation, and you talk about the difference between praise and affirmation. Will you say more about that and why you think
Yeah.
it's important for coaches to understand?
Yeah, and again, we'll start with background and current context. So we know that at the high school and college level, specifically within the athlete population, but I would say also more broadly within just the generational cohort, we're seeing increases in anxiety and depression and suicide among young people. We know that athlete mental health and well-being has been impacted in a variety of ways, and that's a whole separate conversation. Who is responsible for what? What is mental health? Because I think by and large, there's a notion that mental health is the absence of negative feelings or emotions, when part of being human is having those negative feelings or emotions, but also having the felt capacity to deal with those as they arise, to move through those in a way that supports long-term health and well-being. So when we know that this is true about our younger generation, one thing that we can start to do is when we're talking about praise and affirmation, and I'll say by and large, praise is pretty much a part of every coach's toolbox. You see an athlete do something well, and you say something that validates or praises that action. Oftentimes I'll hear like, good job, well done, that's it, that's better, right? First challenge, praise is often generic. So that good job, well done. One of the challenges is context. If I'm coaching an athlete, the athlete is doing something in real time. I'm right there to witness it. So there's not a felt need to be specific. They know what they did. I saw what they did. So why would I name it? When we fail to be specific, when we fail to name the specific thing that was good, we miss an opportunity to help cement a deeper level of understanding of awareness for the athlete about what it was that they did well, which increases the likelihood that they know exactly what to repeat or focus on in the future. So instead of great job, it might be great pass, or great timing, like emphasize the thing that was good. And that's specifically within praise. Why shifting from praise to affirmation matters, especially for today's student athletes, given the mental health context that we just talked about, is what we find in high praise environments is an increase or spike in athlete confidence in that context, but then a decrease when that praise is absent. Okay. So praise is good. And I want to be really clear, if the options are no praise or praise, please go with praise. Like praise has value, praise is supportive, praise is confidence inducing. And what we found is when praise is absent, we might see a dip or drop in an athlete's confidence. Affirmation, in the words of kids these days, it hits different because affirmation is often focused on an internal process or qualities innate to the individual. Praise is often focused on outcome or performance. So, in that same context, in the example I believe I use in the book, I was watching a volleyball practice and outside hitter made a great kill in practice. And the coach said, great job, I love that. Okay, so two challenges. First, great job, not specific. Would have been better served to say great kill or great timing or great follow through. And then I love that. And this is one of those very nuanced things between intention and impact. Anytime a coach says, I love that, their intention is positive. They want to let the athlete know that was fantastic. Like, yes, please do more of that. Unintended negative impact, again, depending on the individual. I do see this in more of a gendered way. It happens more often with female athletes than it does with male athletes. But when a coach says, I love that, if they say that phrase often, they can unintentionally start to condition an athlete to perform to please them, to win their affection, rather than simply performing because they have the ability to do so. So we need to be careful. Our intention is high. Great job. I love that. Seemingly innocuous phrase, unintended impact over time. I'm conditioning the athlete to perform in a way that pleases me, that wins my affection and approval. Okay. Shifting from praise to affirmation. Affirmation has greater staying power because it names something that the athlete takes with them when they leave the training space. So going back to that volleyball example, great job. I love that. A coach would be better served to say something like great decision because an athlete takes their decision making with them when they leave. They use that decision-making ability in all areas of their life. So I've just affirmed something that's true about them that exists outside of the training environment that facilitated that positive outcome. So in addition to, the instant gratification of kids these days, the focus on achieving the outcomes, the highlight reel that goes onto social media, we need to be able to refocus their attention on the process. One of the ways we can do that is through affirmation. An exercise that I give in the book, because for many people, praise feels accessible. Affirmation is a little trickier. Like, how do I move from praise to affirmation? An exercise I invite coaches to do is start to take inventory of your praise phrases. Like, what do you commonly hear yourself say in a coaching environment that fits into that bucket of praise? And then an easy exercise you can do is what I call the add because exercise. Take that praise, great job, and then add because. So great job because, and then you're going to name what the athlete did and why it matters. So example, great job, because when you position yourself there defensively, the offense can't see an open passing lane. You can stick with praise, use what you already do well. Add because, and then name what the athlete did and why it mattered. That's going to start to shift to affirmation. When we affirm people, if you can seek to take those praise phrases and then identify what within that praise was facilitated by something internal or a quality the athlete has. And then the next opportunity, instead of using that same praise phrase with the athlete, use your affirmation that you've already come up with in advance.
Yeah, that's really good. That's fascinating what you shared there. That, yeah, in a high praise environment with kids these days, yeah, it does bolster them when they're with you, but when they leave you, it doesn't necessarily stick. I just think there's so much power as coaches that we hold, and just the words that we speak in general.
Yeah.
And like you said, the ability to affirm who they are as people beyond just their performance in the sport. I think about my own playing career, and there's quite literally still to this day, there's moments and words that coaches said to me that I remember. I vividly remember being, it's probably fifth grade. I couldn't have been more than like 10 or 11 years old. And it was like an end of season banquet for this little basketball team I was on. And I don't remember this coach's name at all. I can barely picture his face, but I remember this moment standing next to my mom when he walked up and he just said, "Man, Luke is so coachable. I loved coaching him this year." I was like,
Mm,
whoa, like, and I'm
yeah.
I'm old now, and I remember that, And there's some
Yeah.
other moments where coaches said things about who I was that stuck with me, and I think that
Yeah.
as coaches, one, I think we just got to recognize that's how powerful our words are. They're quite literally every player you coach probably is going to remember something you said, good or bad,
Yes.
for the rest of
Yes.
their life. One, we should be very, um, yeah,
Intentional.
just intentional with our words. My goodness.
Yeah.
And then
This is
two,
a this is a
yeah.
podcast. Oh, I'm sorry, Luke. I didn't mean
No,
to
I was
interrupt
just
you
gonna
there.
say we've got to be thinking about, man, how do I affirm who they are beyond just
Yeah.
their performance as a player.
People often ask, Betsy, when are you going to start your own podcast? And again, it's one of those things that I think would be fun to do. And I don't currently have the bandwidth or capacity to do it. But if I was going to do it, there's a quote in the book, Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. And it says, while no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a life or a relationship or a job, any conversation can. And I love that quote because it speaks to exactly what you were just mentioning. The podcast that I've yet to create would be called Any Conversation Can. And I would invite athletes or coaches to recall something their coach said when they were playing. And I seek for like a validating one and then an invalidating one. Like, what's something that your coach said that you have never forgotten, that you always remember? So you remember, like, gosh, Luke's so coachable. And I remember I had a coach at one point who said at halftime that I was a defensive liability. And this is after I'd won Defensive Player of the Year in our conference the previous 2 years. But like, I remember that moment specifically. Now, for me, that was a negative one, not on the highlight reel, but to be able to evaluate like just the power of words. The phrase that a coach says in a passing moment could be something that a kid takes with them for a lifetime. And the other thing that came up for me, this was years ago. Our daughter, our oldest daughter, I think at the time was 2. She's now 4.5. And I remember watching something on Instagram, and it was, parenting commonly say to our kids, like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Instead of saying, I'm proud of you, to ask, like, oh, that's awesome. Are you proud of yourself? Like, starting to give the opportunity for them to recognize, like, oh, this feeling that I have of doing this thing that I've never done before, that's pride. And like, yeah, I am proud of myself. A question I often ask athletes is, where does your confidence come from? And the answers are really interesting. They might start with, well, it comes from knowing that my coaches and teammates believe in me. And I'll say, okay, I love that, right? I'm going to use that phrase and then I'll catch myself and say, okay, that's good to know. Talk to me more about belief. Like, what is belief for you? How do you know if your coaches or teammates believe in me? When they go down the coaching path, they'll say, well, I know my coach believes in me if they trust me enough to put me into competition. And so I'll say, so it sounds like you know your coach believes in you if you get playing time. And they'll be like, yeah. I'll say, okay, interesting. Let's talk about that more because there's so many factors outside of an athlete's control that might influence how much playing time they do or don't get. It might depend on who we're playing. It might depend on who else is on that athlete's team. It might depend on what the context or situation is needed, what's required based on their skill set and the context of the competition. So if they are sourcing their confidence from playing time, there are going to be limitations and challenges about how confident or unconfident they feel. So even if an athlete's answer is my confidence is dictated or determined by outside sources, that's okay. I don't need to change that. The opportunity is, can I invite them to also consider other sources of confidence that they control? So going back to that, like, I'm proud of you. That's great. I know my coaches are proud of me, but am I proud of myself? Because if I'm proud of myself, separate from the times I'm hearing it from other people, I am likely more confident than if I relied on other people to tell me they're proud of me in order to feel better about myself.
Yeah, that's good. That's probably even a gut punch for coaches as you listen to this. Like
Yeah. Where does your
where's
success come
yeah,
from?
where's our
Is it the
confidence success?
scoreboard? Is it
Yeah,
like your manager, your
I
supervisor?
know
Is
I'm a
it
good coach
parents?
just because we
Yeah,
won more games than we lost.
correct.
That's yeah, it's really challenging, and I think yeah, for a lot of young people, those are some tough questions for young people to answer. Well, where's your confidence come from? How do
Yeah.
you know they believe in you? But hopefully enlightening, and like you were saying there, I like I want my own kids or the kids that I'm coaching to yeah to have that internally, to not have to depend on, like you said,
Yeah.
things out of their control to draw that from, because if that's where they get it, like when that thing goes away again, it's like, oh well, now I don't believe myself, people don't believe in me. But the reality is, no, like some kid just transferred in that's really good, and now you're not playing. But it's not that, yeah, who you are changed, or the belief and confidence in you changed. The circumstance just changed.
Yes.
Like, and that's just
Correct.
life.
You're as valuable as you were before that kid came in. They just happen to be more skilled at this time at your position. But it
Yeah,
it doesn't devalue who you are. The context
yeah,
changed, but you're still as valuable.
yeah. That's really good. I know another thing you talked about in the book, and we kind of talked about it. We are starting to touch on it earlier in the conversation, just around again the power of words. And as coaches, sometimes we get it really wrong with words. You talk about the importance of coaches being vulnerable and owning their mistakes. I think that's probably something, especially for older coaches, that's maybe a tough pill to swallow, or a tough thing to even consider doing. Why would I admit a mistake to my team as the leader, etc.? Will you just talk about why you think that's so important, and why it's particularly important with this generation of athlete that we're leading?
Yeah. Then the second half of the book, I use the acronym TEACHERS to talk about the most important elements for a quality sport experience, not because they're preferences for kids these days, even though they are, but because leaning into these elements as coaches increases the quality of our coaching as well. The T in teachers is transparency. And with access to information, Gen Z, Gen Alpha value transparency. And that relates to that why, like the information, the data they need to know. Oftentimes, the challenge for coaches, and I would say more broadly for leaders in a lot of spaces, is we were hired to know. We were hired to have the answers. One phrase I hear less frequent than I'd like to from many coaches is when an athlete asks a question to say, I don't know. And it's okay to not know. One, you're modeling vulnerability. You're modeling there are likely other things out there. The fear I hear from coaches is if I don't say I don't know, if I say I don't know, they're going to go back to a parent or my sports supervisor and say, why did you hire this person? They don't even know what they're doing, right? So to say like, I don't know, or I'm not sure, here's what I think could be effective. So insert your knowledge, but you don't have to know. Leaving open the possibility that there might be adaptive ways to do things signals your humanity, your potential fallibility, although fallibility in this case doesn't fit well for me because if we have a growth mindset, like sometimes people will call me a communication expert. And I'm very quick to say, thank you, that's flattering. And I call myself a communication specialist because never ever will I truly be an expert in communication. There is no ceiling for how much we can learn about the different ways we can use language to be effective with the people that we seek to communicate and connect with. So I'm constantly in process. When it comes to modeling transparency, modeling vulnerability, to owning mistakes, people across the board have choices. And many people, when they make a mistake, especially if they happen to be in a position of leadership and they feel tasked to know, is I made a mistake. I'm going to try to cover it up as quickly as possible and move on with as few people as possible noticing so that I don't seem weak as a leader. We have a choice to go the opposite direction. And when we make a mistake, to pause, and I'll say own it publicly. And I don't mean on social media, I mean own it with whoever was present at the time of the mistake or impacted by the mistake that you made. So own it publicly, followed by what you intend to do to make it better now, and also how you intend to avoid making a similar mistake in the future. And in a Substack article I had a couple weeks ago, I talked about some of Dr. Becky's work on repair. So, one thing I found really interesting that she had to offer was rupture is inevitable. And I would say in a communication context, same thing with confrontation. Anytime you put a bunch of people together, there's going to be confrontation. Confrontation is not the issue. Differences of opinion, not the issue. How we handle ourselves and how we choose to facilitate those conversations, whether or not we choose to repair, that is the difference maker between connection and fraction. So rupture is inevitable. Repair is a choice. Confrontation, inevitable. What we do in moments of confrontation, when we make a mistake, how we repair, that is a choice. So when we choose as a leader to model vulnerability, to take ownership, to take accountability, because I hear this from coaches all the time. Kids these days are afraid to hold each other accountable. Okay, let's unpack that. Fear, most often in this context, are they afraid to hold each other accountable? Absolutely, because they've yet to be taught how to do that in a way that doesn't threaten the thing they value most, the pure relationship. And most of them have had negative experiences related to accountability. Even when you talk about the words, Luke, like accountability conversations, and I was just teaching a group of coaches and administrators about this yesterday. When it comes to accountability conversations, most people, and I do this all the time, in a room full of people, I'll say, by show of hands, how many of you feel that accountability is important for individual or team success? Every hand in the room goes up. Like, okay, great, hands down. Now, by show of hands, how many people have had an experience of being held accountable or holding someone accountable that for you is not a positive experience? And by positive, I don't mean feels good. I mean results in a more positive relationship, more positive outcome. There's a felt understanding of they're having this conversation with me or I'm having it with them for a good intended purpose. Most of the hands in the room go off. So if we know accountability is important, and yet most of us are not having a positive experience with accountability, what is that about? What I found is that when it comes to accountability conversations, most of the time they're not conversations. We've reached a certain point where someone is now telling you, Luke, this is what you have to do. This is how you have to do it. This is when you need to do it by, or else. That's not a conversation. All you have to do, if you're being respectful, is look at me and maybe nod your head or say, I understand. You're not an active participant in that conversation. So we focus on holding people to account. And when you walk into a bank and say, I'd like to open an account, a question that the teller will probably ask you is, what kind of account? Two main kinds of account, checking and savings. And this is largely how we operate with accountability. We're either continually checking up on or checking in on people to make sure they're doing the thing they said they would do in the time frame they said they would do it, and or we are saving up all of the moments where they've missed that mark or our small frustrations or disappointments, sometimes to the point that we need to close that account. So instead of focusing on account, let's focus on the second half, ability. How do I increase someone's ability to do the thing that only they can do? For me, this involves changing the conversation, because when we change the conversation, we change the relationship. So instead of telling them, I'm going to ask. And for me, this typically involves 6 questions. First question, what's your plan? So, Luke, if this needs to happen, what's your plan to make this happen? And then they are going to say, not me, they are going to say, because I'm increasing ownership, agency, accountability, investment, they're going to say what needs to happen. When we get to the point where they've hit on what I know needs to happen, my next question is going to be, what's your plan to make that happen? And they're going to detail out how they plan to make it happen. The next question is, what could likely get in the way of your ability to execute the plan as you just detailed? And you can use any version of this question, but this is the most frequently left out part of accountability conversations. What could come up? What could get in the way? What barriers might exist? Because most people have a positive intention to be accountable. They want to follow through, but then life happens or unexpected things come up and they get derailed. So inviting people to think proactively when something arises, either because this has come up in the past or this might come up, given what I know is ahead, what things could get in the way? And then the fourth question is related to number three, what's your plan? When one of those things comes up, what's your plan to navigate to stay on track? Question five is how can I support? And I'm a big fan of using the word support instead of help because I found that many people have, I'll say, varying relationships with the word help, with needing help, with a felt ability to ask for help, with what receiving help means. And then the last one would be what's your next step? If you can get someone to take an actionable next step during that initial conversation with you, you've already put them on the path towards accountability. So we need to start to change the conversation if we hope to have a different experience with accountability, but also increase the accountability of young people.
Yeah, that's good. Maybe last question or following up on that. How do we help Gen Z hold one another accountable, right? We're in practice. Player A is not meeting the standard. Player B notices it. But again, to your point, it's not just kids. It's
No, it's
adults
not
too.
just
What we're
kids.
all most afraid of
Correct.
is that severing of peer relationships, right? It's like adults don't want to go hold another adult accountable, right? But we're like, kids should just do it, right? But how do we help player B hold player A accountable when player A
Yeah.
is not meeting the standard?
Well, and this taps back to your previous question of, why would coaches bother to model owning a mistake? When you, as the leader of your program, model what ownership and accountability looks like, you are now providing a great example for what they can choose to do when they make a mistake. And when you've got an entire team of people that are unafraid of making mistakes because they understand how to handle them when they happen, you've just increased the psychological safety, like the trust, the reliability of the entire group. So, how does player A hold player B accountable? If we simply expect it to happen in the moment, and we as coaches or coaching staff have not yet provided tools and training for how they can have those conversations, that is a wildly unfair expectation. And I get it. Like you think like, come on, this is our standard. We were clear about the expectations. You guys need to hold each other accountable. Okay, coach, have you helped them practice? In low stakes, low risk environments where the actual relationship between teammates is not at stake, have you invited them to practice some tools related to accountability conversations? Easy way for coaches to do this, take 5 minutes at the beginning of practice, divide your team into small groups, give them all the same scenario. Hey, if you notice that this teammate is doing this thing that you know is detrimental to team culture or below the standards we've set for how we want to operate as a program, how would you address that with your peer? Invite them to think proactively through a hypothetical situation that does not involve a real teammate relationship and allow them to practice. And then give them an opportunity. Hey, we're going to have two groups in 2 minutes or less. Show us how you would have that conversation. And then they model it for the team. And then the team's going to feedback. Here's two things that we heard or saw in that conversation that we think were great and added value to the relationship. If this were a real scenario, here's two things we might offer as a shift in order to improve the quality of that communication. Also, even if you never have them practice, at least establishing within your team, what is the value of holding each other accountable? Or a more nuanced way, what's the difference between being called out and called up? Where are they different? How are they the same? And what differentiates whether it's a positive experience or a felt negative experience for an individual? Why is it important for us to do this with each other, to have the ability to go there with each other, especially when it's uncomfortable, or it would be far easier to not do that? I know you and I talked a little bit about choose your hard before we recorded, and this is one of those choose your hard moments. Like it's hard to hold your peer accountable. It's also hard to let your teammate get away with things that you know are holding your team back. Choose your heart.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. My big takeaway there is, look, if we don't, yeah, give them some chances to get reps doing this when it's, again, low stakes, not actually the real thing, kind of
Not a
modeling
threat.
it, role playing it. Like,
Yeah.
that's where you got to start,
How do
especially
we
with
expect them
with
to
young people.
succeed, let alone
Yeah,
do it well,
yeah.
if we
I think
haven't
there's
prepped them?
as I reflect back on my coaching, there's probably some teams and players where I was like, man, I didn't do a good job of that. And maybe it would have been different if I had, of just taking some time and, yeah, giving them some reps helped them build that muscle and that skill. Well, Betsy, this has been awesome. Before we wrap it up and hop off, will you share with the listeners, one, where they can get your new book, and two, where they can learn more about the work you're doing or connect with any of the resources you offer?
Sure. You can go to betsybutterick.com. That's my website. You can link to social accounts. You can subscribe for free to the Substack list. You can look at information about the book. The book is currently available via my website, and I'll throw a link in the show notes. Anyone that's listening to this podcast, if you would like to receive the book at a discounted rate, you can use the link that's in the show notes to take advantage of that. The book will be available more broadly on Amazon within the coming week. So right now it's early December. So if you're listening to this after, you can probably find it on Amazon. I just recorded the audiobook last week over the Thanksgiving holiday, and that will be out probably around the 20th of December. So if you prefer to listen to kids these days, you can take advantage of that as well. But I would say go to the website, betsybutterick.com. Social platforms, I'm most active on Instagram. There's simply far too many for me to keep up with all the spaces. So find me on Instagram. You can also follow along on LinkedIn, but I would say website, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then Substack is the best way to keep up to date about the communication resources that I have to offer.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Betsy, thanks for the work that you're doing and for your time.
Thank you so much, Luke. And to the coaches out there, good luck. Kids these days I know can be a challenge, and they're also incredibly exciting to work with. So
Yeah.
thanks for listening.
And they need you. They need you.
They do. You're their teacher. We can do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Thanks, Betsy.
Thanks, Luke.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast, and a huge thanks to Betsy for joining me. To learn more about her work or to get a free copy of the podcast notes from this episode, you can head to the show details to check out all of those links. If you're interested in joining our free online community of coaches or subscribing to our free coaching newsletter, check out the links in the show details, and you can also find information on becoming one of our Nike Sports Camp directors. Thanks for listening.